Hi everyone. So as you already may know, the Power Vote is a not-for-profit focused on helping youth understand the importance of voting and taking part in the democratic process of Canada. So today we have Member of Parliament Dan to help us understand a little bit more about what he does and the democratic process and what youth can be doing in terms of helping. So Dan, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
My name is Dan Ruimy. I'm the Member of Parliament for Pitt, Meadows, Maple Ridge in British Columbia. It's my first time in politics. I got elected in 2015. I worked in the restaurant business all my life. So for me, when I see a problem, I run to the problem. And back in 2015, when I started thinking about running for elected office, as an owner of a coffee shop, I was the barista to many of my customers, and I would hear a very common theme. There was a distrust for politicians. Politicians weren't listening. There was a lot of challenges that were going on. And so I started thinking that if I ran, what would I be able to bring to the picture, since I've never been in politics before. But my whole life I was in the armed forces as a younger man. Like I said, I spent 25 years in the restaurant world. I've opened over 140 franchise restaurants. So I think it's how we approach things that help us move the dial forward. And that's what I campaigned on in 2015 was community involvement, community engagement, doing roundtables, town halls, and just getting involved and being accessible to our constituents. And well, I won, and here I am today.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dan. So, do you see the gap between people with regards to voting, especially youth?
Well, it was interesting because back in 2015, I kept getting this question from reporters, from a whole bunch of people, and they said, Dan, why do you think youth are so apathetic? That's the word that they use, apathetic, to voting. And I thought about that, and I said, it's the wrong word, because apathetic suggests that that's lazy. In fact, I actually think it's the other way around, that politicians were apathetic on how to engage youth in their community. And that was, I think, one of the biggest challenges. Don't show up at a school 2 months before an election. You need to be engaging students long before then. Don't show up at only the grade 11s because they possibly could vote for you next time. Show up at the grade 4s and the grade 5s, because that's where you can actually make a difference and help youth understand, A, they have a voice, B, how to find that voice. That to me is how we get youth involved. Not only how we get youth involved, but how we move our country forward, how we change the mindset of why we need to vote in this country.
That is amazing. I think it's really important that we start from a grassroots. So with regards to that, why do you think it's important that everybody, like you said, fourth graders, why is it important for them to get involved in the democratic process at such an early age? So
when people think governments, politics, they look and they say, well, I hear it all the time, what's the point? Nothing ever changes. That's not actually true, because if you look at the country over a period of 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, we've made tremendous strides in cultural, in education, in everything, every aspect of who we are as a nation. And that's important. Where the challenge lies today is that people don't know how we get to that point. They think, what decision are you going to make today that's going to change it tomorrow? But it doesn't work that way. It's long-term strategy thinking. It's being able to think, what is this picture going to look like in 20 years? So if I'm talking to grade 4s, I'm trying to lay the seed that you do have a voice. Your voice does count, but first you have to find that voice. When we see protests that are going on, there's nothing wrong with protests. That is for, in some cases, youth that are trying to find their voice. And it's okay. Whether it leads to something or doesn't lead to something is not the issue. It's about finding the voice, but what the expectation that comes afterwards. That it takes time to change the way that we do things. North America has a car culture that we hop in our car and we go everywhere. You don't find that culture in Europe. because they're smaller communities. They can bike, they can take buses, they can take the high-speed trains. We don't have that in North America yet. So how do we change that mindset? Well, it's a long-term thinking. And when you engage the grade 4s and the grade 5s and the grade 6s, they learn not to fear expressing themselves.
No, it's really well said, Dan. Thank you so much. And right now, I think, like you said, with regards to protests and youth putting their voices out, right now, as you all may know, we have the Fridays for Future happening and campaigning for environmental awareness. And right now, other hot topics are women's rights with regards to the abortion bill and mental awareness and health in general. So what can you as an MP do to raise awareness and have action towards said issues, and what will you plan to be doing in the future?
Long question there. Let's talk about the environment. Too many times we focus on one aspect, a pipeline or carbon tax. That's where everybody goes to and says, climate change, these two things. It's so much bigger than that. Stopping a pipeline doesn't change the effects that are happening around our globe right now. So the question that I ask then is, what are we doing? How do we move that dial forward? And when you look at some of the initiatives that our government has taken since 2015, for example, in 2015, 1% of our coastline, 1% was protected. 1%. We had a goal that by 2020, 10% of our coastline would be protected. We're now up to 8.7%. You can say climate emergency, but if you're not taking action, then you're not moving the dial forward. We've invested heavily into the Oceans Protection Plan, reopening the Kitsilano base, putting up listening stations. That blew me away, that we don't know where any of these ships are, but having listening stations manned by also first-line defense of some of the First Nations that are along the coast, involving them. And these are the things that help to do that. We've invested heavily in fish and fish habitat renewals. So we know we have problems with our salmon stocks, for instance. So we came up with a wild salmon stock fund that will help to understand what are the challenges, but how do we get back to that? When we look at 50 years ago, you look at all the connected waterways. We're at Meadows, Maple Ridge, we're a watershed community. You had connected waterways, so the fish came and they went. They came and they went. They went out to the ocean, they had fun, they came back and they had their babies. Over time, through climate change, environmental practices, development, property development, those waterways became disconnected. So the fish couldn't figure out how to get to the ocean, or they got to almost the ocean and they went through the flood pump stations and they were grinded up, right? So how do we change that? Well, when we build new infrastructure, such as a Pitt Polder pump station, we have to ensure that we put in fish-friendly pumps so that the fish can come and they go without hurting them. We have to try to connect the waterways. We're trying to get a fish passage on the Alouette Dam, because the fish come and they have to put them on the back of a pickup truck and drive them all the way up and throw them into the Alouette Lake. It's those things that are stopping our fish from thriving. So we have a whole bunch of initiatives that we're trying to do that speak to those things. We may not all agree on pipeline or no pipeline, but we can all agree that we have to take targeted efforts, whether it's through fish, whether it's investing in species at risk, whether it's investing in restoring fish habitat. These are the progress that you make. So I look at, what progress are we making? Are we moving forward? I worry that may not happen. I worry that we may start to go backwards again, because it's very easy to not think about those things. So our youth, it's important for them to understand how that process works.
For sure.
Because it's not one thing that changes everything. It's an ongoing
A
thing.
change, for sure. Thank you so much. So what would be your final message to youth about the power of vote?
I'm going to turn this one on you, because I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
This is your nonprofit organization, correct?
Mhm.
Why did you start this?
Well, I started this because I think that we have the power in our hands. We have the next generations in our hands, and it's up to us to do something about what is going on, whether it be the climate, whether it be the way our countries run. So I think if we start now, if we start small from a fourth grader and work our way upwards, we can ensure that the future of Canada will last and we can continue to grow as a democratic nation together.
That's my message to you. Well said.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.